What were the Dark Ages and why are they called that? Was there a centuries-long eclipse, a serious candle shortage, or is it something a bit more esoteric? In today's episode of History Calling, I reveal all the answers to help bring you into the light. Let's start with when the Dark Ages were, because even this simple act of definition is trickier than you might think. If we go back to 1883, they were then defined by the American Cyclopedia as being between the 5th century AD and the beginning of the 15th, a period of about 1,000 years, and they were classed as being the same thing as the Middle Ages. As time moved on, though, the definition was tightened up to refer to a shorter span. In 1911, Encyclopaedia Britannica put them between the 5th and 10th centuries, while the modern-day concise Oxford Dictionary of Archaeology provides a range between 410 and 900 AD, saying that the British Dark Ages followed the fall of the Roman Empire. A similar date range is also favoured by the Oxford Dictionary of the Middle Ages, which gives the years 475 to 1000, while the Oxford Dictionary of English prefers circa 500 to 1100. As I said, it's tricky. Something equally imprecise is the question of where the Dark Ages occurred. We can certainly narrow down the scope to Europe, maybe even Western Europe, which is the definition given by the Oxford Dictionary of the Middle Ages and the Oxford Dictionary of English, but that's all. Some, like the aforementioned concise Oxford Dictionary of Archaeology, would insist that it is a peculiarly British concept. They might have a point. Writing in the History Workshop Journal in 2007, historian Janet L. Nelson noted that, of all the European languages, only English had and has the expression the Dark Ages distinct from the Middle Ages, something she attributes to a desire to separate the Anglo-Saxon Dark Ages from the post-Norman conquest period after 1066. I don't speak any other European languages myself, apart from a smattering of French, so I can't confirm or deny if this is true. But I know many of my listeners are from all over Europe, so let me know in the comments if this assertion is accurate. Is there no equivalent term for the Dark Ages in your native tongue? Now let's move on to what the Dark Ages were. What made them dark and when did they get that name? Well, you'll be happy to know that my earlier references to a centuries-long eclipse and the world's worst candle shortage were just jokes. The Dark Ages refers to the concept of darkness rather than a physical manifestation of it. In particular, it refers to a perceived lack of sources from a certain time period, making it harder to research that era. It can also refer to a period of time after the collapse of a civilization, like the Roman Empire, when there is an apparent lack of progress, invention and innovation amongst a group of people, compared to before and after that window of time. We also associate the Dark Ages with violence, barbarity and superstition, but of course the ancient world, which came first, was no picnic either, and the idea that it was so much more civilized and peaceful than what followed is actually rather absurd. There were plenty of wars, murders, corruption, other crimes, and horrific punishments then, just as there continue to be in the centuries immediately following the so-called Dark Ages, and superstitions certainly didn't disappear with the advent of the early modern period. As for where the term originated, for that we need to look back to a 14th century writer called Petrarch. Petrarch was an Italian poet, and in the 1340s he wrote an epic poem entitled Africa, in which he contrasted the achievements of the ancient world with the stagnation in which he felt he was living, using the theme of light and darkness, and saying of his own era that, "My fate is to live among varied and confusing storms. But for you, perhaps, if, as I hope and wish, you will live long after me, there will follow a better age. This sleep of forgetfulness will not last forever. When the darkness has been dispersed, our descendants can come again in the former pure radiance." In 1602, The exact term came into use thanks to Caesar Baronius, an Italian author and churchman who wrote a 12-volume historical work called the Ecclesiastical Annals. There, he referred to the years between 888, the fall of the Carolingian Empire, and 1046, the start of Pope Clement II's reign, as the Dark Ages, using the Latin phrase saeculum obscurum, and for him it referred to a paucity of sources with which to study that time period. Despite him only referring to an era lasting a little over a century and a half, his term went on to become synonymous with nearly the entirety of the Middle Ages or early medieval period, and was placed in contrast to the supposedly more enlightened times which followed. But was that fair? Were learning, art, and progress really in such dire straits during the so-called Dark Ages? Before I reveal the answer, just a quick reminder, if you're enjoying this video, to please give it a thumbs up, the algorithm likes that sort of thing, and subscribe to my channel with the notification bell switched on so that you never miss one of my videos and you can avoid being kept in the dark when it comes to history calling content. If you'd like more from me, you're in luck, because you have lots of options. You can become a channel member here on YouTube by clicking the join button under videos or on my homepage, then following the on-screen instructions. Or you can find me on Patreon, Instagram, and my Amazon storefront. They're all linked below for you, and they all provide extra content from me. For instance, my historical figure and time traveller patrons will be getting a mini podcast this week explaining how, why, and when history is divided up into different eras, like medieval and early modern, and how the labels differ from place to place. New patrons get access to my Patreon archive for the tier they join and the lower tiers, so even if you're listening to this video long after it's gone live, as long as my Patreon still exists, you can still join and look up my earlier content. It is true that the further back in time you go, the fewer documentary sources you generally have to work with. But that doesn't mean that no one was learning, teaching, or recording anything. It just means that those types of sources haven't survived, especially from a comparatively damp country like the British Isles, where paper literally moulds and rots if not stored very carefully. This is less likely to happen in a very hot, dry country. For example, I once tried to unfold a document in an archive that was a mere 300 years old, and it was crumbling so badly at the sides that I gave up. I didn't want to be the person on whose watch that mouldy bit of paper finally disintegrated in its entirety. I would also point out that historians of the future are going to have increasingly few documentary sources to work with for the 21st century, thanks to our growing reliance on computers and digital records. If anything happens to the internet, this is going to be considered the new Dark Age by later researchers, who will struggle to find out anything about us without access to our online footprints and our social media platforms and ebooks. Yet we would generally say we're living in the most enlightened, technologically, socially, culturally, and medically advanced era ever, and that humanity has never been better. So a lack of documentary sources does not mean that education and innovation had stalled, and that our ancestors between the 5th and 14th centuries were all imbeciles. In fact, as I've shown in another video, the idea that they nearly all thought the Earth was flat until Columbus sailed to the Americas is completely untrue, and just another example of modern snobbery wherein many today seem to assume that everyone before the advent of modern technology was an idiot, which kind of overlooks the modern flat earthers and the special kind of stupid they possess. In actual fact, there were plenty of innovations and progress in Britain and elsewhere in Europe during the so-called Dark Ages. Universities came into being. Bologna was founded in 1088, Oxford in 1090, and Cambridge in 1209, for instance. And mechanical clocks were invented too. Literature continued to abound as well. The English epic Beowulf was written down between the 8th and 11th centuries. Its exact age is disputed. Chronicles continue to be kept in monasteries. The famous Venerable Bede lived and wrote in England during the 7th and 8th centuries, and Geoffrey Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales during the 13th. Magna Carta, one of the most famous, influential documents of all time, dates to this supposedly dark era, as does the invention of embassies and ambassadors in different countries. Incidentally, if you'd like to try your hand, or rather I, at reading some old texts and see how far you can go with them, see my video on reading old handwriting, which I'll link on screen and below for you. There is also plenty of surviving evidence of the accomplishments and achievements of our ancestors during this period in the form of architecture and art. For example, I give you Westminster Abbey, Canterbury Cathedral, and the Tower of London, all built, or at least partly built, in the 11th century and still standing intact today. There were plenty of other impressive buildings too, which have unfortunately been lost to fire or other disasters over the years. Old St. Paul's Cathedral springs to mind, for instance. In terms of artwork, we have, to name but a few, the beautiful illuminated manuscripts, which I've shown you some pictures of here, which also double as documentary sources, of course. The famous Bayeux tapestry from the 11th century, actually an embroidery, but let's not split hairs, and paintings like the Wilton diptych showing Richard II among others, and created in the late 14th century. In short, there was a lot going on during the so-called Dark Ages, and it was on the advancements made during this period that the later Renaissance and Enlightenment were built. There's a famous quote by Sir Isaac Newton, part of which appears on the rim of £2 coins here in the United Kingdom, which runs, "If I have seen further, meaning further than others, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." In other words, his achievements would not have been possible without the groundwork laid by those who came before him, which enabled him to take the next steps. I feel the same way about the medieval era. It wasn't as advanced as later periods, just as we are presumably less advanced than people in 100 years' time will be, if climate change or some other disaster hasn't wiped us all out. However, humanity's knowledge is cumulative, and we accumulated a lot of it during those centuries. To write them off as simply being the barbaric Dark Ages is to do the millions, maybe billions, of people who lived during them a great disservice. It should come as no surprise, therefore, when I tell you that the term has fallen out of popular use amongst academics nowadays, though it retains a place in vernacular English where it is simply used to refer to anything old-fashioned. For example, a massive power cut caused everyone in the country to lose their phone signal for an hour, and it was like going back to the Dark Ages. There was no Google Maps, no WhatsApp, and worst of all, no YouTube, so they couldn't even watch history calling videos. And with that terrifying thought, we've reached the end of another episode. Let me know in the comments if you think the Dark Ages deserve their name, and for more history of the medieval period, try one of these videos next. I'll be back next time, and until then, keep learning.